Hey, Archie, inflation and high prices have me wanting to stop making 401k contributions.
Well, Rob, let's not do that and let's talk about why. I'm Archie Hoxton.
And I'm Rob Hoxton.
And this is Last Paycheck, weekly wisdom to help you retire and stay that way. Welcome back to the Last Paycheck Podcast, brought to you by Hoxton Planning and Management. We're your hosts, CFP professionals, Archie Hoxton and Rob Hoxton. And today we're going to talk about a very interesting article from Moneywise, written by Maury Bookman, and a very, very sort of startling statistic that came from it.
Troubling.
Yeah.
Even.
It's that 46% of U.S. middle-class workers have either slashed or stopped contributing to their retirement plans and accounts altogether. And wow, that there's already, there's a backdrop of general unpreparedness.
People aren't saving enough already.
Yeah. And so there's a lot here that I think there's a lot to unpack about that has a lot to do with what's going on in sort of American financial life and what's going on in the economy that may be at the root cause of this. But then also, if you're someone who's thinking maybe you might need to do this, it's important to know maybe what you're giving up.
Yeah. I mean, it's really easy, I think, to point the finger, the root cause perhaps of rising prices that remain elevated, even though inflation rates are dropping. It looks like they're headed closer to 2% than 4%. At one point, they were over 9%.
Yeah.
And inflation, of course, is an increase from one year to the next, year over year, an increase in the cost of goods and services that we as consumers might use. Once those prices are elevated, they tend to be sticky and stay there. You don't usually see prices drop a lot. Sometimes you'll see prices of housing drop. Sometimes you'll see things like computers or other electronics drop. But usually things don't drop a whole lot. Cost of a dozen eggs, gallon of milk, if it rises, tends to stay up there. And so people are feeling that pinch, even though the activities that the Fed and the government have been doing have really sort of brought much of the increases under check.
Yeah.
Prices are still sticky. And perhaps people's pay raises haven't kept up with the cost of those important products.
Yeah. Well, and I think I've seen it 100 times on social media. It's sort of a misconception about when people say inflation is cooling, they don't mean that prices are coming down. They mean that the rate at which prices are rising has gone down. Yeah. So, you look back the last couple of years and the cost of this basket of goods kind of went like this. And then it continued to go up, just not as aggressively. And it still is going up, but it's kind of more at what you'd consider closer to a historical average.
I mean, in reality, I think what's happened is that prices have gone up. They've remained elevated. They're not going up as quickly now. But the thing that hasn't kept up is people's pay. Yeah. So it's true that over the last few years, household incomes have increased. They just haven't increased fast enough to keep pace with the cost of what they need to buy with that income. And so naturally, it's got to come from someplace.
Right.
It comes from, in this case, for 46% of those surveyed, from their retirement savings, which is tough because there's going to come a time when each of us will either be too old or too sick to keep earning a paycheck. And we need to think about that future person that we will be.
Right. I think another notable and really important element of this too is, this trend has been a little quieter, but it is a serious trend that we need to address as a country. Inflation's been in all the headlines, but what hasn't necessarily is consumer debt and the growth in consumer debt over time. And the effect that has on particularly, we're talking about middle class, everyday Americans, the effect that debt has, where, another point in this article is that people are also turning to credit cards. So if 9% inflation or, around 3% inflation feels painful, which it does for many people. 25% interest which is
Right.
close to what the average is on credit cards, is outrageous. And that, not only is that you're paying so much in interest, but it reduces the amount of flexibility, how much inflation you can absorb. If you've got debt servicing, I mean, the average car payment in the US is over $700 a month.
Wow.
You don't have any room to absorb inflation if you've got, a lot of debt servicing costs.
Yeah. When we, on occasion, will have the opportunity to help someone with their budgeting. It's not really our everyday practice, but from time to time, we'll have the opportunity to help people with their budgeting, trying to figure out where we can free up dollars to do some planning, to save for retirement. And when we look at monthly expenses and you have 2 new cars, I mean, the client that pulls up and they're driving this $100,000 Tahoe and they're not able to pay for the basic staples of life without running credit card debt up. I mean, they have already sold themselves to the banks. They're no longer financially sovereign human beings anymore because they are owned by the lenders.
Yeah.
And there's not a whole lot you can do. So it's so tempting to give yourself these luxuries on time by borrowing, but it's like slipping a noose over your head. It really is.
I mean, you're giving away your most important wealth building asset, which is your ability to earn income. You're giving that away. Aside from the basics of housing, food, and which go up in price, gas, utilities. Aside from that, if you promise away most of your excess income beyond that to the bank
and your future income,
you don't have room for those other prices to go up and absorb that without sacrificing something. And if it's consumer debt and things that don't appreciate in value that you can unwind and get out of if you needed to, like a car, if you get upside down in a car, your only choice is to work until it's paid off. Mm-hmm. So I think that that's another really important trend that is causing that. And this, it is sort of inflation was a catalyst for many people that, closed up that little bit of excess income that was going towards their future objectives.
Yeah. And we don't want to diminish the fact that prices have risen over the last 4 years a lot.
Yeah.
Like 25%.
Yeah.
Over 4 years. That is big. And people's earnings, their incomes have not kept up with that. That is a huge issue. But if you owe yourself, if you've committed all of your excess income to a bank or to a lender, credit card company, you have, as you said, Archie, no cushion for inflation, which does happen from time to time.
Yeah.
You have to plan for it. It's been many, many years since we've had any significant level of inflation. And in this period of time, the inflation has lasted for a very short period of time compared to the 70s and 80s. Interest rates, though they seem high, aren't anywhere close to they were in the 70s and 80s. If you aren't careful with your finances and you borrow too much, you don't have any wiggle room.
Right. And I think that was a risk that is often forgotten about. We definitely live in a culture where debt is regarded as just a necessary part of life. And I think that it's important to, be really intentional with it and be careful not to overextend yourself and account for the fact that prices rise, and sometimes they rise really quickly.
Archie, not to cut you off, sorry, but one of the cool things or interesting bits of information that the author brought up was that if you take a year off, let's say you're 35 years old and you're going to work until you're 65 years old, and you are accustomed to saving $3,000 a year into your 401k.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say you are, because you're young, you're investing in like an S&P 500 index fund or something like that, mostly stocks. And let's say you have an average annual return of 8%, some years much more, some years negative. If you skip 1 year when you're 35 and you don't put that $3,000 in, what's it cost you when you retire at 65?
Yeah, given those assumptions, 30 years, 8% annual return on average, that's $30,000 in lost
Nest egg. If you live for 90 years till you're 90 years old, it's probably more like 60 or 70,000 in lost opportunity.
Easily.
And that doesn't even consider if you get a match. If you get a matching contribution from your employer, and a Vanguard study that was done said that 95% of U.S. employers offer a matching contribution. If you get a dollar for dollar match, you're not just giving up $30,000 when you retire, you're giving up $60,000.
Yeah. And that's compensation that your employer has agreed to provide to you. And so
but you don't get it unless you put money in first.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So that's important. You're also losing out on tax benefits, right? That $3,000, it depends on your tax rate, but that could be a loss of $500, $750 to the IRS that you take by taking it as a paycheck rather than loading it into your 401k, or that maybe it's $3,000. Maybe you only get $2,500 or $2,000 if you don't. So you're also losing out on tax benefits and tax sheltering. Yep. So there's multiple layers to sort of the consequences. The other thing is there are really important buying opportunities while you're accumulating. It changes when you retire and you're actually taking withdrawals for income. But while you're accumulating, if you cut your contributions, you may miss out on really important buying opportunities when the market goes down, when the market loses value. And all of a sudden, the investments that you would buy in your 401k are much cheaper.
Yeah, it's like they're temporarily on sale.
Yeah. So, for example, in 2022, we had inflation. If someone had stopped their contributions, that's when inflation really took off. If someone had stopped their contributions during 2022, they would have missed one of the best buying opportunities for almost an entire year, which would have been the best in like over 15 years, best buying opportunity. Mm-hmm. Those dollars would be some of your highest returning dollars over the course of your life, depending on what the future of the markets looks like. So you're missing buying opportunities too. So there's really good reason to stick with it. Although, it has to be recognized that, the facts are facts. If wages haven't kept up with inflation has gone and grown quite a bit, and there's a general trend towards, consumer debt and eating up your discretionary income with consumer debt, then there may just not be another option. But over time, as things, as things continue to develop, and you can, if you were someone who was forced to make that decision, the sooner you can get back into it, the sooner you can free up that discretionary income and get back to contributing, the better.
Here's the thought. So if you need to reduce your savings to your retirement plan, maybe consider not stopping it entirely. Maybe just cut it back. If you have to, cut it back to 1% of your pay.
Yeah.
And then put in most plans now will allow you to escalate that percentage. So you cut it to 1% and then you put it on autopilot essentially so that it then slowly goes back up. Maybe you don't even notice it's happening, but it gets you back to a point where you ought to be saving close to 10% or more from your pay into your retirement account. As you're doing that, you're still getting some of the money from your employer. As it increases, you get more from your employer. It's always better to remain engaged than it is to cut it off completely.
Yeah, because that's the other thing. It is much harder to get started again, right? Because you've become accustomed, and we all know this inherently about ourselves, right? You become accustomed to that extra income. It's hard to go back and start, putting it away again. When it's automated, you don't think about it. This is how much gets into my bank account. I don't think about the other dollars that don't. So, yeah, I mean, and maybe if you're in the camp of, if I didn't have these debt payments, the inflation wouldn't be as significant a problem for me. Maybe it's time to look at, tackling them and looking at a method for tackling them.
Yeah, if you're already retired, this is already something that's not an issue for you. Tell your younger loved ones, family members, and friends. Tell them to tune in because this is really, really a big deal. Mm-hmm. If you've ever spent time with an elderly person who lives on Social Security alone, it's a pretty sad situation. It really is. They're very limited lifestyles.
Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah,
it's hard. All right, well, that just about covers it for today. So we hope you enjoyed the topic. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, leave us a comment, and if you'd like, give us a call or text. And if you want to talk with specific questions, we're here for that. So anyway, we look forward to seeing you next time. You've been watching Last Paycheck, weekly wisdom to help you retire and stay that way. If you like this show, be sure to hit like and subscribe. Last Paycheck is available anywhere you get your podcasts.